Peter, Stewie, Lois, Chris, and Meg all have their moments, and they never fail to turn everyday situations into chaos. Peter's not one to just sit around, especially when he sees his friends achieving more success than him, so he gets the bright idea to set a world record by eating the most nickels. This stunt, however, leads to nickel poisoning and causes him to lose his vision. While trying to drown his sorrows at his local bar, the Drunken Clam, he ends up saving the bartender, Horace, from a fire, totally by accident since he didn't even realize the bar was ablaze. His heroic act, though unintentional, gets him on the local news and earns him a medal from the mayor. Plus, he even receives an eye transplant, although the new eyes come from a homeless man in a tragic mishap involving Peter's guide dog. In another twist of fate, Peter is ordered by his wife Lois to read more, but he accidentally gets hooked on Van Halen's music after confusing their album with George Orwell's book, 1984. His new obsession leads to a wild chase with Ernie the Giant Chicken, which ends with Peter in a coma. Inside his coma, Peter experiences bizarre dreams, including being on a cruise ship with no Wi-Fi, which he desperately escapes. He wakes up just in time to see Lois about to pull the plug on his life support, shaking his trust in her. But eventually, the family patches things up. Now let's talk about Peter losing his memory. It's like something straight out of a soap opera. One day, he just forgets everyone in her family. This happens after Peter gets lost in the wilderness after a plane crash. Lois tries everything he can to get him to remember, but Peter looks at him like he's a stranger. It's pretty rough for Lois. She's so used to being the hero, and suddenly her husband doesn't even know who she is. She tries all these crazy ideas, but nothing works. It's one of the few times you see her genuinely sad. Poor Lois, not even his usual antics can save her this time. Lucky for him, his hatred for Meg kicks in before he is sent to the wild, and he asks her to shut up. As for Chris, he gets bullied at school, and it's as awkward as you'd expect. The bullies go after him, pulling all kinds of mean pranks and making his life a nightmare. Chris, being the sensitive kid he is, doesn't know how to deal with it. But here's the twist. Stewie, who usually brings the worst of everything on the family, actually steps in to help. He fights back against the bullies for his brother. He hid in his backpack and helped him fight back. Sadly, Chris kidnaps Stewie for himself and later regrets it when Stewie confronts him at the debate. Sadly, 2 of his bullies commit suicide. Now, Peter, when he goes in for a routine prostate exam, you'd think it'd be no big deal. But this is Peter Griffin we're talking about, so he completely misinterprets the whole situation. Instead of understanding that it's just a regular checkup, Peter thinks it's some kind of weird and invasive procedure. He spends the rest of the episode feeling like he's been wronged in the worst way possible. It's almost impressive how he manages to take something so routine and blow it up into a full-blown trauma. Only Peter could turn a simple doctor's visit into a dramatic event. Also, there's Meg's attempt to make friends, which, unsurprisingly, goes horribly wrong. She meets this mysterious guy who invites her to join what she thinks is a cool club. Turns out it's actually a suicide cult. Yep, Meg almost gets herself killed just because she's trying so hard to fit in. Luckily, Stewie steps in and saves her at the last second, but it's a close call. You've got to feel bad for Meg. No matter what she does, she can't seem to catch a break. Lois finds herself kidnapped by none other than Stewie. Typical Stewie, right? He's always trying to be the evil genius. He holds Lois hostage, and it looks like he might actually succeed in his crazy scheme. But Lois isn't just going to sit there and let her baby run the show. She eventually turns the tables on Stewie, showing him that maybe he's not as smart as he thinks. It's a classic Family Guy moment. Stewie's got the brains, but Lois has the guts. And in the end, it's the guts that win. Chris sneaks into Meg's room to read her diary, but she catches him as they chase each other. They bump into Stewie, who falls down the stairs and gets a serious head injury. Chris and Meg hide the wound with a hat, but Petter soon figures it out. He admits he's knocked them out before and agrees to hide Stewie's injury from Lois. When a raccoon bites Stewie's head, things get worse, and Meg insists they go to the hospital. Peter throws Stewie behind Lois's car to make it seem like she ran him over. Eventually, they take Stewie to the hospital. Months later, Stewie reappears with his head bandaged. Meg, always unlucky, gets herself caught in a gas station robbery. She's just minding her own business when criminals storm in and take her hostage. It's a scary moment for Meg, and it affects her. By the end of the episode, she is about to be sold as a sex slave, but luckily meets a Middle Eastern prince who calls Meg a goddess and asks her to marry him, or if she declines, he will have her flown back to America on their private jet. Meg agrees to marry him, but sadly, Stewie and Brian accidentally kill him while trying to save Meg. Then there's Brian's accident, one of the saddest moments in Family Guy history. Brian gets hit by a car and doesn't survive, leaving the entire Griffin family devastated. Even Stewie, who's usually tough as nails, breaks down. It's a huge shock, and for a while the show has a real sense of loss. Fans were left in disbelief, and the family had to cope with losing their best friend. It was a rare emotional moment in a show that's usually full of laughs, proving that even animated families can go through real heartbreak. During a game night, Lois sneaks Peter some kiddie-level questions to boost his ego, and voila, Peter thinks he's the next Einstein. Feeling chuffed, he boasts about his smarts until Brian pops his bubble with a real IQ test. Surprise, surprise, Peter's not the genius he thought he was. This revelation sends him spiraling, but then he discovers his diagnosis lets him wreak havoc without consequences. Classic Peter moves, until he accidentally spills hot grease on Lois, prompting child services to step in. Despite his wacky schemes to get his kids back from Cleveland, it's Lois who ends up fixing the mess, as usual. Stewie's brilliant idea is to create an evil robot clone to help with his chores. Sounds smart, right? Well, not so much. The clone, of course, turns evil and tries to take over Stewie's life. Suddenly, the baby genius finds himself running for his own safety as his invention tries to replace him. Stewie, the one who's always planning and scheming, becomes the target of his own plan. It's a classic case of be careful what you wish for. Looks like being too smart for your own good really does have its downsides. Next, Peter thinks Quagmire doesn't like him anymore, and instead of just moving on, he goes all out to win him back. Peter's desperate attempts to be friends again are honestly a little embarrassing. He basically becomes a clingy mess. He tries everything to impress Quagmire, but all he gets is humiliation and rejection. It's funny how he can't just take a hint and ends up becoming the victim of his own paranoia. Poor Peter, making a fool of himself once again. And finally, Chris. In a football game, Peter decides to use his own son as bait, knowing full well that Chris will get tackled. Unsurprisingly, Chris gets flattened on the field. Way to go, Peter, Father of the Year. Chris becomes the victim of Peter's terrible coaching, and he's left bruised and embarrassed. Maybe next time, Peter will actually come up with a strategy that doesn't involve using his own kid as a human shield. But then again, it's Peter, so probably not. So what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below. If you like our channel, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to ring the bell icon so you always stay in touch with Family Guy. See you in the next one.